Hello, everyone. I would like to thank the EIP for organizing this event. In fact, as you had my previous colleague have said that the Syrians are feeling anger. Yes, big anger, not only because of the response for the earthquake, but because their voice was absent during the conference of donors. We had hoped that the international community and the United Nations would have learned something from what happened during the earthquake, but it seems that the international community, as well as the United Nations, are insisting on putting a siege on the Syrian in northeastern Syria, and they are insisting on humiliating the civilians that are present in this area under the pretext that saying that the humanitarian aid arriving for them. So every day I'm surprised to see the number of declarations that comes out of the United Nations saying that they do not want to politicize the humanitarian aid. But everyone knows that when the United Nations waited for 7 days to have the approval of Bashar al-Assad to get the assistance is a politicization itself. The party who is politicizing the aid is the United Nations. We are not demanding not to politicize the aid, but some of the mistakes and huge reports published by the Damascus about the number of the mistakes and errors and corruptions in the offices of the United Nations will push us to call upon all the international community not only not to politicize the aid, but to create new mechanism to observe and follow up the humanitarian aid, especially those that are being distributed by the United Nations, because it seems that the offices of the United Nations are now transformed, and there's a large number of the employees are sons and daughters of very high level political leaders in Syria, such as it has been mentioned in one of the reports in the European Union. The daughter of it is Luqa, who is responsible of several actions, is a part of the United Nations, and also the sons and daughters of several political leaders in Syria responsible for the violations are responsible people in the offices of the United Nations in Damascus and several other agencies. So it seems that the operations of United Nations are not under scrutiny whether when it's regarding to how to distribute the humanitarian aid. Also, we have received several letters from several countries saying that there will not be a representative of the Syrian community, but the United Nations will convey the voice. But we do not trust the United Nations. The Syrians do not trust the offices of the United Nations and their agencies. We do not trust their reports. We have seen so many misinformation that were spread after the earthquake, and they were spread by the United Nations and also the head of the WHO when he took videotaped the destruction in Naaman area that was destroyed by bombs in 2018, and he published them on Twitter saying that these are the results of the earthquake, as well as the interview with Mr. Mustafa Ben Lemleha, the head of the humanitarian issues in Syria, who talked after the second day or third day about the earthquake to the Sana official agency. This is for the Syrian regime, and he only talked about Latakia and Aleppo, and he didn't mention the northeastern Syrian area where the destruction was bigger and the number of victims were bigger. The white helmets were fighting alone the first days after the earthquake, and they were fighting against time. They were fighting against everything alone with their sole hands. They were only supported by the Syrian organization, Syrian community, the Syrian everywhere around the world, in addition to some civilians who were present around the world, and their response was faster than any response made by the international community. Their response was even bigger than any response made even by the United Nations, because the United Nations was still sleeping back then. And in addition to this, there was something very noticeable that we should have noticed, which is that the United Nations didn't deal with the situation in northern Eastern Syria until a few days later. So I think that
فيجب أن نشكر
we need to thank Mr.
سيادة
Martin
الرئيس
Griffiths for
على
his courage
شجاعته
because he
هنا ننظر
acknowledged failure.
صراحة
But
لكن
we was
هنا
waiting
ننظر
for some accountability steps and measures. But
ولكن
in
حقيقة
fact,
بدأت
the
تتطور
statement of the
البسيطة
United Nations were
للدفاع
starting
عن
to defend their
الدفاع عن
mechanisms
حقوق
and their
المواطنين الذين
employees who did not do what they have to do, and they were
النهار
defending them
تحترم
themselves, saying that
القانون
they are
الدولي
working
لأنها
according to the
تعمل من
international
وراء
law.
ولكن
But there are a lot of legal
ونجد
people
وخلاص
around the world,
وشرعية
and there
عامة
are a lot of legal
وهناك جرائم
studies
قانونية
published
كثيرة
by
معهم
several legal
حقيقة
responsibles,
نحن
and
نتعامل
some of them
معهم
were working in the
ونعاملهم
United Nations. They were saying to the people working in the United Nations that you are presenting misinformation to the people through the what you are publishing. You are misleading the people in explaining the international law, because the international law was not made by people who are keen on getting the humanitarian aid without any politicization to the Syrian community. And in fact, this is what was said by the Truth Fact Finding Commission to know what in fact had happened after the earthquake. And as I demanded after the earthquake to open an investigation, transparent investigation of what happened, so far they haven't done this, and so they did not do their job in responding to the earthquake. But it seems that they did what has happened to them. And after 3rd of March, the convoy and the to Syria stopped through the cross border, and maybe my colleagues or my other colleagues can tell more. Since March 3rd, no humanitarian aid were coming to northeastern Syria, and we don't know why. They are saying that we are gathering the needs of Syrians. However, the voice of Syrians is absent. If I can get a message to arrive to the people who are going to meet in Brussels on the 20th of the month, I would like to tell them one word: Syrians do not trust the United Nations. The reports of the United Nations are misleading. The United Nations issued reports 3 days after the earthquake and saying that only 5% of the areas that were hit by the earthquake were responded to from the white helmets. No, and on the third day we were covering 100%, but on the first day, of course, we were covering a lower area because of the lack of resources, and we were not able to reach the areas because there were no coordination on the field. So now we are not going to talk and say that we need to talk only about the needs. We are talking about the mechanism to determine these needs. We need to see and look back at this mechanism that was used by the United Nations, because they are building upon in their report about the information, but what's the amount of the information that are true? So several reports were published from the United Nations through the official emails, but we were coming back to them and tell them that these reports are not exact. So we don't know how the United Nations is gathering the information for these reports. But when the donors will meet, we need to tell them that it's not only the thing that we need to think about is how to reach the humanitarian aid to the suffering people, but also we need to know how to distribute this humanitarian without humiliating the people and in a safe way. So everyone who are present here with us on this platform, they know that the first article of providing humanitarian aid is do no harm, whether mentally or physically. But in fact, let us say that the non-coordination and the United Nations waiting for the approval of Bashar al-Assad to provide the help caused a lot of suffering for the people who were devastated by the earthquake in the northeastern Syria. This we should know it. Another thing that when the United Nations is continuing to go to the Security Council to have a decision on sending humanitarian aid is politicizing this, because everything that's happened in the Security Council is politicized. And and it's away from any humanitarian negotiations we demanded with our partners everywhere around the world, within the United States, UK, Germany, Netherlands, Sweden, and and France, uh, whom we met, we demanded them to take out the humanitarian aid from the Security Council. We do not want to be blackmailed, Russian blackmailed by the for these aid. Russia is doing a lot of catastrophe and calamities in Ukraine, and today the Syrian regime is trying to use these humanitarian aid in all ways. And we have noticed the number of abuse and uses that the Syrian regime is doing for this humanitarian aid. So the Syrians are not only waiting for these aid, but they are waiting them to arrive with dignity, to arrive without taking 23 approval from security apparatus in Damascus. Therefore, today we need to work not only on the topic of planning and putting the list of the needs after the earthquake, but to develop mechanism for humanitarian response in the United Nations so that they will be in line with the size of the catastrophe. Most of the northern eastern area in Syria was devastated even before the earthquake because of the lack of the aid and support. Because 3 months before the earthquake, 23 health care body were closed. Uh, 23 car for the white helmets were not working because they need maintenance, and we were not able to do the maintenance because we don't have the enough funding. So all of this should be put on the table in an honest, transparent way, and we need to talk and raise our voice so that they listen to us. They are not allowing the Syrians to get to the international conferences, and Mr. Jer Peterson is not dealing with this issue as if there are people devastated now who are living without any roof over their heads. He is searching for solutions that are not logical. He is talking about steps that are not logical in the solution for the solution in Syria. Therefore, we all need to be clear and aware for everything that's being worked on by the United Nations. The United Nations today has become part of the problem itself. So we are not against the United Nations as an organization, just to be clear. And we know that all the countries around the world are relying on the United Nations. But if they were unbiased in providing the humanitarian aid, how are we going to be convinced as the Syrians that they will be unbiased in the political solution in Syria? Therefore, uh, in fact, the United Nations should be more strict, more transparent in dealing with the situation in Syria. There should be accountability steps and mechanism for those who are responsible. These things should be amended, and the humanitarian response should be amended. When we say what's the big title for the earthquake, it should be clear that all the politics during the 10 past years of the United Nations were failing because they were not able to create a mechanism, flexible mechanism to do the response, any response. They said that the roads were blocked to Bab al Hawa, but the Syrian aids were coming in. How they were coming in? Let me tell you that the road was blocked from Antakya and not from the Center for the United Nations office. From the United office to Bab al Hawa was open, and Mr. Martin Griffiths walked on this road from the Center for the United Nations to Bab al Hawa, and the road was open. But they think that this is an enough pretext to use and to say, and some other time they would say that the employees were damaged and suffered damage. I would like to say that if there were 30 organizations that are present with us in the northern eastern Syria. Every organization have lost staff in the earthquake, but we all responded. We all shouldered each other and we presented a response. We did the response. Why the United Nations was late days before they took any response? And let me say, maybe my friends in Banafsaj stayed a week under the rubbles, but they were responding as much as they can, despite the fact that their families were under the rubble. The families of our volunteers were under the rubble, but we responded. So, is it possible that the United Nations doesn't have mechanisms to send teams from their offices, from their other offices around the world to help in the response? This is very weird. We need a very transparent investigation to know what happened during the first days after the earthquake. The world should know what happened after the first days of the earthquake. So, after the search and rescue, uh, operations, the White Helmets now is working with their other partners to remove the rubbles. And now, what Syrians need, they need shelters, they need a restoration for the infrastructures, public buildings, schools, hospitals, so that children can come back to their schools, so that citizens can have medical services, basic needs, and also to work on rehabilitating the infrastructure so that the civilians could get their lives back and recover after this earthquake disasters. I'm sorry if I took long and I spoke for a long time, but this is what I had to say. And thank you so much for the EIP for sponsoring this meeting and this event. And in fact, we are grateful, so grateful that our messages are getting through in a transparent and honest way. And this fact, everyone knows that Syrians today do not trust in how the international community is dealing with the Syrian cases. Therefore, the absence of the voice of Syrians is a negative thing, in addition to the absence of the voice of the needy people on the ground. Thank you so much. And I would like to thank my colleagues who are going to speak during the coming sessions. And I'm fully aware and confident that they will get the real needs of the Syrians through. Thank you.